I've always been super into Greek mythology, shout out my fellow Percy Jackson kids. Many of the greatest story tropes, motifs, archetypes, genres and cliches can be traced back to very early theatre. And I mean very early theatre. Perhaps the most famous example is the ancient Greek tragedy, which is usually characterized by the protagonist facing some great consequence as a direct result of their own hubris. Modern examples include Breaking Bad, Barry, The Social Network, Seven, and The Long Walk. But in ancient Greece, these sorts of outcomes were given personification in the form of Nemesis. Nemesis wasn't traditionally seen as evil, but rather a force of nature that maintains balance where human excess oversteps its boundaries. A sort of cosmic intervention. This has changed over the centuries, and Nemesis are now seen to be primarily evil, but it did get me thinking, who are the best portrayals? Characters who test and prod at another character's flaws. This isn't to be confused with The Rival, who I may make a separate video on. The main difference being Nemesis is characterized as being directly opposed to one's goal and represents one's own shortcomings, whereas a rival shares one's goal but usually in direct competition. We may as well start with the most topical example, Superman. And to clarify, I don't mean Lex, I mean Superman. Because if you were to ask him, I'm pretty sure Superman wouldn't consider Lex his nemesis. He is just a very persistent obstacle to his goal of helping people. Lex, on the other hand, is a deeply flawed individual whose weakness is directly exposed by the very existence of Superman. The definition of hubris is excessive pride or self-confidence. I can't think of a character who exemplifies that more than Lex. There's even something inherently Greek about Luthor always referring to Superman as a god and deciding to oppose him anyway. It's a good thing Superman is a lot nicer than the old gods too, because brother, they would have shut that shit down time ago. But I digress. Superman is the reason Lex will never be the most powerful man on Earth. His greatest failure personified. The natural justice of Nemesis put Superman here to make sure Lex is always tortured by his own ego. And I think the best part of it all is that Superman will never see it that way. He is simply trying to do good. If he did see himself as some kind of antithesis to Lex, it would probably validate some of Lex's feelings. I'm so smart and capable that God himself has to come down and thwart me. But Clark makes it clear time and time again, he does what he does simply because it's what a man should do. Which pisses off Lex even more. However, while Lex is still busy seething, DC's other greatest villain cannot get enough of his nemesis, the Joker. Unlike the dynamic between Superman and Lex, Batman and the Joker are both trying to prove a point, one that is constantly disproved by the very existence of the other. This makes Batman the nemesis to Joker and Joker the nemesis to Batman. But what point are they trying to prove? Well, Joker's whole shtick is chaos. Masochism, sadism, anarchism, whole lot of isms in Joker's camp. Everyone's just one bad day away from becoming him. Everyone's corruptible and everybody's evil at heart. That is, until the pesky Batman comes along who believes the exact opposite. Everyone is redeemable and everyone's good at heart. There are obviously flaws to both of these arguments, which have been explored in God knows how many stories between the two. The Joker's hubris lies in his pessimism. He refuses to concede that there are people like Batman who will never give up on someone like him. And Batman's hubris lies in his optimism. He refuses to concede that there are people like the Joker who are just irredeemable and deserve death. They perfectly serve one another's characters and personify the ancient concept of the Nemesis, balancing out and exposing their absolutist ideals and the flaws that come with them. Of course, Marvel isn't opposed to the Nemesis archetype either. And while a lot of you are probably thinking of Spider-Man, I think the best example in the Marvel roster is Thor. As a character, Thor's best stories always share a few things. a sense of duty to weaker mortals, and the need to earn the worship and power bestowed upon him as a god. Despite being born with one of the most cracked power sets in all of Marvel, and the heir to an entire realm, he is adamant these things are to be used for others. Not only that, but he will happily step away from his birthright if he believes somebody else is better suited to serve the people. Unlike his brother, Loki. Loki grew up already feeling an outcast. The Norse valued strength, honor, and bravery, of which Loki was none. A trickster by nature whose pranks eventually turned malicious. This was only made worse upon his realization that he was adopted. After a combination of classic Abel and Cain jealousy, his lack of approval from the Asgardians, desire of acceptance from his father, and the insecurity of his adoption, was the perfect concoction for his defining trait: entitlement. Loki believes he is more capable and more deserving of the throne to Asgard than Thor due to the skills he was previously mocked for: his cunning, intelligence, and mystical prowess. But in classic Nemesis fashion, Thor's very existence challenges this hubris. The people follow him not just because he's stronger, braver, and more honorable, but because above all else, he has earned it. And he earns it every day by being the god of the people he strives to be. It's not a one-way street either. Thor often finds himself feeling unworthy of his praise, his powers, or his throne. Who better to take advantage of that insecurity than the scorned brother who believes himself to be anything but unworthy? I wouldn't say it's quite as on target as how Loki feels about Thor, but there's still very much a parallel of one another. But comics aren't the only medium to cite the ancient concept of Nemesis. The Lord of the Rings is a series of books and films in which the main villain has a screen time of about 5 minutes. And yet, in those 5 minutes, as well as all the world building that takes place throughout, Sauron's character is well established. Power, control, and order at any cost. It's literally carved into the ring. One ring to rule them all. And he's got the means to make it happen. Even without the ring, he is easily the strongest being in Middle-earth. Surely, for somebody to stand up to him, foil his plans, and defeat an evil king like this, you'd need a pinnacle of strength, a beacon of light, a fearless hero.
Who the fuck is that guy?
As a protagonist, especially in a tale as epic as The Lord of the Rings, Frodo is kinda lame. Hell, the hobbits in general were kinda lame. They enjoy comfortable lives, eating 6 meals a day in tight-knit communities who have little else to worry about other than gossip. The thought of adventure or the unknown to the average hobbit is uninteresting at best and unwelcome at worst. Let alone the idea of war. And that's why it's perfect. Gandalf said it best. I have found it is the small everyday deeds of ordinary folk that keep the darkness at bay. Small acts of kindness and love. The ring in question contains a lot of Sauron's power, meaning it reflects his will of order and power above all else. This means it's almost like its own character, corrupting any nearby even to the point they'd kill their own family if they thought it meant securing the ring. And then there's the hobbits. No desire for power, just good, simple people who enjoy the finer things in life. It wasn't noble knights, wise wizards, or daring dwarves who led to Sauron's end. It was a group of unassuming friends with the will to do good. And the best part is the ring kind of won. Frodo gave in at the very end, corrupted by the lust for power. If it wasn't for Gollum, who was also corrupted, Sauron would likely be ruling Middle-earth right now. This means Sauron's hubris was twofold. He didn't plan for the strength of ordinary hard-working people, and the ring's desperation destroyed itself. I think this might be the singular best example of the Nemesis concept because it's very indirect. Frodo never actually meets Sauron, and Sauron barely even considers Frodo a threat until he's literally walking into his house with his dick swinging. But that doesn't stop Sauron's fatal flaw being exposed by the simple good nature of the hobbits, which is exactly what the ancient goddess of Nemesis used to do. There's only a few examples of her appearing directly in stories, rather she was the personification of one's own flaws. In ancient Greek tragedies, it was framed that the hero would usually cause their own demise, and it was simply Nemesis who enforced the rules. Such is the case with Narcissus, who fell in love with his reflection, and Arachne, who claimed she was more skilled than the gods. Hopefully by now I've illustrated the Nemesis trope, its history, and how much more modern portrayals both deviate and adhere to the goddess's reputation. But just in case you're not convinced, I have one last example which probably hits a little too close to home these days with all the AI stuff, but fuck it, Sonic and Eggman. If you know anything about Sonic beyond blue blur go burr, I probably don't need to explain this one very much, which is a good thing. Sonic, the perfect embodiment of nature. Carefree, fun-loving, and a freedom fighter. Robotnik, the embodiment of control. Order, machinery, and domination. They both carry the positives and negatives from both sides of that coin. Sonic doesn't just represent freedom, he represents chaos. And Eggman doesn't just represent control, he represents human intervention. There are even a few times in various shows, comics, and movies that feature Eggman being helpful, and sometimes just straight up good. There's also hints of some kind of fatherly pride that he has over his creations and machines, but I will admit the game versions of Eggman tend to be a lot less nuanced. Either way, this is a lot more direct of an example. Unlike Superman and Lex, Thor and Loki, or Sauron and Frodo, where things are a tad one-sided, both Batman and Joker and Sonic and Eggman share that this is a package deal. You stand for everything I fight against, and vice versa. As long as the other exists, my worldview can never be realized, and my hubris is forever exposed. You are my nemesis. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and let me know who your favorite nemesis pairing is. Also, a concept I didn't really put much thought into but might be interesting to consider are group nemesis. The only one I can really think of is the X-Men and the Brotherhood, but I think that fits a little more into the rival category, considering their leaders are kind of boys like that. Which reminds me, also tell me if you'd like to see that Rivals video in a similar style to this. Thanks for watching, and I will see you soon, brother.